But it's also interesting because like when you ask the average teenager.
Okay, welcome. Thank you for coming. So you have arrived at a Treasury session, and so what I'll do is I'll explain what Treasury is and what these sessions are, and then I will introduce the speakers properly and introduce themselves. I'm delighted that you were here at a Treasury session looking at the human dimension of digital spatial environments, metaverse, spatial computing. Andrew Zuckerman, creative director, artist, Tobias Rees, AI studio founder and philosopher. So what Treasury does, right, is basically kind of Getty images for very high value, high content digital spatial assets. It's essentially 3D models of exteriors, interiors, environments. And so what we do is we go to architects, film studios, artists, real estate companies, and people who scan the natural world as a business that is becoming a thing, and get their shit and will license it out to people that need it and can't find it anywhere else. That's the theory, right? And so we started as an idea. I had a 9-page deck, and I was pitching from Sweden in my underpants to investors around the world from October of 2021. January of 22, Google and others invested, and then I was like, fuck, I have to build this thing. By about May or June of last year, we actually had some product concepts, and now we actually have a stable version. One of our products, you can start to see it around you. I'll show you some of it in a second. But essentially, if you are a creator of digital assets and you want to get money for that stuff, you think you're good at it, come to us and we'll help you get it placed into metaverses, whatever Apple is launching through the millions of developers they're going to recruit to their vision platform, movies as they converge onto fully, CG workflows, and any other digital spatial environment rich application of spatial computing. If you are building that stuff, come to us to get your shit because we have the best staff, and we think the crucial thing that we have the best licenses. What I've learned in the year of doing this is the tech that we have built primarily isn't going to be the main thing that drives it. What will drive this as a value proposition is the quality of the curation and trust we build with the creators. Obviously, we need to be kind of world-class in technology, which we kind of are, but actually how we frame that trust in licensing, particularly at a time when AI is sucking in all content and pretending that no one owns it, is going to be crucial to our proposition. So if you want good stuff, you don't want to be sued for stealing shit, come to us. I'll just run through very quickly just a few kind of kind of instantiations of what I just mentioned. So basically, this is our story, right? I mean, as I'll explain step by step, the branding genius that helped us work out how we should position ourselves visually and narratively in an extremely congested and contested space of metaverse and spatial communities and Web3 is Andrew Zuckerman and his colleagues, right? And essentially his mission and vision for us was and is keep it infinitely simple, clarify what we're doing, get out of the way of the creativity. And so what we say we're doing is bringing creators more prominence, more value, and making builders build digital environments and the projects and applications in digital and spatial environments. Just giving them good shit and help them get on with their proposition. So what we say we do is we register assets, help people discover assets, and a bunch of other stuff. It's a hub. And in practice, that means we register assets. I'll show you. We'll do it in a second. Get assets in, fingerprint them, enable creators to archive them privately and protect them even while the fingerprint is visible to the world for legal and trust purposes. If they want to syndicate their assets and license them out, we help them do that. On the demand side, we help people build digital environments, browse, view, search, commission, the coolest shit, right? So just to give you a sense of how it works in practice, right? So all of this is basically available via our website, so it's all web-based. platform. You can get these products now. We're kind of gradually rolling them out. To give you a flavor of how it works, let's see here. So on the registry side, if you're a creator, film studio, architect, whatever it may be, this is the way that the registry works. It's very, very straightforward. So let's say that we were doing, let's say test asset. Straightforward. You would have an account, right, as a creator. So essentially, you would add a description to it. You would add an image. 1 second. So you would be able to simply drop a preview image in. What you can then do is pre-list the asset. And what we mean by that is without setting any license framework on it, you could offer it as a fishing expedition in the market, right? See people are interested in it and then work out how you want to license it later. Essentially, if you want to go through a full registration process, you would then actually add the asset itself. And essentially what that means in practice is that you take some version of a 3D asset, all right, put it in. And then what we do, we're building essentially what we call a morphological signature generator as we scan the asset and put a fingerprint on it. So essentially, when we're walking through all this stuff, but basically you dump it in and then we put a fingerprint on it. Now that fingerprint basically means that we know the unique identity in 3D of that asset. It's like content ID for YouTube, right? So even if you decide you don't want to syndicate it, license it, you can license it, we can help you make sure your asset isn't being misused, right? If you want it fully to be private, we've already sold it to a client. And so that's basically the registry, right? Essentially what you can do, once it's archived, it's private, is go through the syndication steps and essentially say, okay, we do want to license it, we can license it, this is the framework for licensing, and so on and so forth. So that's what we do very basically for creators. Essentially for, let's see here, for what we call builders, we built what we call a discovery engine, right? So essentially it's a web-based tool for you to explore assets, right? And so this is the beta version. It's available for kind of test clients right now. Essentially what you can do here is explore all sorts of ways of getting access to content. So we've got key supply classes, premium architecture, classic architecture, film, and so forth. You can kind of filter in various ways. If you want to look on specific creators you think you may have, there's a bunch of content from Zaha Hadid and other premium architects. And so basically it's a browsing system, but it's also a searching system. So let's say what you want to do, we need to look for specific assets, and you happen to know that there's a bunch of stuff like Bianca Inger's in there, look at that, look it up, check it out, see if you want to license it. It's not in there, right? So I happen to know that the architect Kengo Kuma doesn't have any content in there. Basically, you will be bounced to our commissioning system, right? So basically, you can invent whatever you want, specific creators, speculative concepts, and we will go and get it for you as fast as we can. So we spent the last year building that. All of our existing investors are reinvesting at a high value, and I think we're doing a good thing at a time when people are kind of wondering how to differentiate in a world of weird shit in the metaverse. Not only that, actually the reality is that I think, and this is what this conversation is about, people actually want to do something of meaning. It isn't just a diversion, it isn't just social VR, it isn't just gaming, this is not a distraction, this is a whole new layer on the internet. And so that's what we've tried to build. So essentially, that's a kind of summary of what we've done. There's a bunch of other stuff we've built. So we have an index, so ultimately we're indexing every building on the planet and giving real estate owners the opportunity to, say to their competitors, to their users, to anyone who wants to offer them services, whether they have a digital model. We want to enable everybody to be in the spatial computing space. And so this is not ready for announcement yet, but just to give you a flavor. The 3 top architecture companies in the world are joining this. 2 of the top 5 film studios are joining this. So Bianca Ingalls, Zaha Hadid, and Foster & Partners are joining. Miramax and Lionsgate are joining. Artists are coming on stream, a bunch of real estate folks coming on stream, and we now have our first real-world scanning companies. They do shit for Netflix documentaries, they're joining. And so it feels like we're in the right place on the supply side. On the demand side, our kind of launch partner is going to be Amazon AWS, that is promoting and developing essentially what they call virtual production, which is a live, real-time CG system, essentially, where you have 3D assets on a soundstage, unlike post-production CG or green screen. but they need assets for that. So they came and spoke at one of our events with one of our advisors who's one of the world leaders in the virtual production movie industry. They phoned us a week later and said, oh, we need assets. We can't get them anywhere else. We think the market for this shit might be falling in your lap, and they will now help us launch this stuff. So it feels like we're in a good place. It's taking time because to win the trust of Georg Engels and Foster and Promise takes a spectacular amount of time. But if you take that time and you do it with the guidance of people like Andrew and Helmer and others, I think you're building something special that creators can trust, and people that have invested millions of dollars in creating value propositions in digital environments, they need to rely on this stuff. It's why Getty Images exists, right? Getty Images is basically exists because if you're going to put a photo on the front page of the New York Times, you cannot afford to be sued after it has had millions of impressions within a few hours, right? And so that's why we exist. So you've got a sense of the registry and discovery system. If you are doing either of those things, if you're a creator, if you're a builder of digital environments, speak to us, we're ready to play. What we're trying to do around that, partly because it all takes a long time to build that trust and build like realistic technology in this space, is a content machine, basically. This is probably our 7th or 8th session, where we are trying, I think, succeeding to be the leading or a leading conversation space for spatial computing and digital spatial environments and spatial assets at a time when there's enormous amounts of noise. And everyone's claiming something that I think if you take Meta will take years to become realistic, even if it isn't a fully commercial distortion of what's going on. We'd like to see if we can be a kind of trusted, honest broker of technical, creative, legal, humanistic aspects of this conversation, of which this session series is a part. We have a bunch of support services through third parties to help people get their shit sorted. This is all pretty complicated, and so on and so forth, some projects. So that leads to this conversation. It's the 7th in a series of our so-called sessions. This one is very interesting, I think, because it's probably the first one that isn't really about the tech, right? It isn't about the whiz-bang of real-time rendering. It's not about AI. It's not about the kind of dorky shit. I mean, the legalistic aspect, which is frankly sitting mostly on the technical issues, particularly in relation to AI. This is about what does any of this mean for us? If it is true that spatial computing, digital spatial environments, or metaverses are profoundly part of our technical future, if it is, as I believe, a spatial layer on an internet economy and industrial society, what does it mean for humans as opposed to venture capitalists or technologists? When I first encountered Andrew, so early last year, I do remember the conversation we had, and I remember the sense of like a physical opening of my mind when he was talking about what he thought this whole space should be, and what our contribution could be in it. And essentially, if I paraphrase, just to summarize, he was saying, if this isn't an inviting proposition, if it isn't a stable and safe proposition, it will not work. It will not become a mainstream thing. It will become an infected air to an infected digital technical conversation with big tech is now struggling. And so that's where I think the brand and the ethos of the company kind of took root. It has to be something that is clear in aesthetic and ethical and social intent. So I'm very happy that Andrew's here. Andrew is one of the sort of leading, I wouldn't say just creative designers in the brand space working with tech right now, but one of the thinkers of how brand interfaces with ethos and meaning and helps companies actually build identities that matter. I'd like you to introduce yourself, because this is that was pros.
That was a lot.
But
I didn't remember that conversation, but I do want to take the time to actually introduce my friend Tobias, who very graciously agreed to come and talk to us today, who has inspired a lot of my thinking over the last 3 years. And it wasn't until I met Tobias that I found a kind of counterpart in thought that I hadn't quite articulated yet, that I was exploring in my own work.
You never said that to me before.
About how we reconcile the relationship between humans, nature, and technology. And he has created many kind of formal apparatuses for doing this, both in education, in writing, in art making, and now in product making. with an AI platform that he's been creating called Lim, which is very, very exciting. I don't know kind of what to share about myself beyond what John was saying, but you know, I'm a kind of glutton for coherence and clarity and understanding and creating spaces where things emerge and become opportunities for us to understand them and to have experiences that are felt and not just thought. And I think that, you know, in a very democratized way, and I've tried that through many different mediums. I have a multimodal studio in New York where we make a number of things. I spend some of my time in art making, some of my time in simply thinking and having conversations and excavating human culture that finds their way into books and podcasts and various things. And I also spend a bit of my time that doesn't feel like work in many ways with brands. And I've been fortunate to pass through some of the world's biggest brands and have an effect on them, and then some of the new ones that are very exciting. And I think when I met John, what I was inspired by was something that I'm consistently inspired by, which is that when we find a possibility to create less friction in a tool, whether it's a better drill or a better paintbrush or a better camera or a better platform that can enable things to be created and to take the kind of confusion out of getting started on making things, I think that they're the generative possibilities that create exponential value in the world. And I think that's what John's doing here. I think that what Treasury is basically a forcing function for things to be made, new stories to be created, new worlds to be built. And through those worlds, and I think there's a bit of what Tobias and I are going to get into with John, is this idea that we, as human beings, we live and die and continue on through story and narrative. And stories need to be created. We need tools for them. We need a toolbox to create stories, to paint a future of possibility that people can understand. So when new ideas come into play, whether it be in climate technology or really anything, we need to imagine what that may feel like to be inside of. And we've never been in a better position of possibility for that. And it's projects like this that will enable anyone to come in and build worlds that they imagine that they can then lay narrative on top of and lay experience on top of to share. And I think that is progress in terms of our journey of narrative and journey of storytelling that is very much connected to the primordial story of, this is just another step from the Lascaux Caves to now. How are we telling our story? How are we reflecting our world? How do we understand what we've experienced? So that's a little bit of Tobias' intro and a little bit about me. I'll let Tobias intro himself.
Better? No, you can't hear anything. Too much for new digital technologies.
Can everyone hear? Because I can share mine.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me all right? I can also just speak louder.
Let me just twist this down. Like that, see if that works.
Hi. Can you hear me all right? Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. First, welcome. I'm happy to be here with those two guys and with all of you. I'm really curious to know who you all are and hope we can talk a bit during the drinks time. A word on me, I think that's really easy. I was for many years a philosophy professor, and I was trained in the history of thought, something that we did in the 1990s in Germany. Sort of every now and then new words appear, new concepts appear, and they really change how people think about themselves, how they experience themselves. And I was trained in thinking about thinking to find these little conceptual presuppositions and read books from the ancient Greeks till the present to sort of find when does a new one appear, when does one disappear. And we always stopped in the 19th century. We never came to the present. And I was really curious, like, could today be a moment of such intellectual change? And I think it's really easy to see for most people that we live in philosophically discontinuous times, by which I just mean the little concepts, the thoughts, the philosophies we live by are not good enough or are not sufficient to navigate the world that we increasingly find ourselves living in. Digital environments are one example, AI is one example, and so on. So at one point I began to really zoom in on that. What are the concepts that today no longer work? And I spent all of my time focusing on three concepts. Basically, I focused on the modern concept of the human, of what it is to be a human being, what all humans share, independent of where they live or when they were born. And in the 17th century in Europe, you know, sorry, I'm a philosophy professor, so you have to bear with me. You get a new concept of the human emerge, one that is really, really powerful for the Western world and through the dominance of the world, the Western world for the whole world. That is, humans are those things that are more than mere nature, more than animals or plants. Why? Well, because they have reason. And humans are also more than, different from, mere machines or mechanical things. This is really, really powerful and important because you have two boundaries, nature and machines, or you have human things, natural things, and technical things. And it's so impossible to exaggerate how important that is. Look at the University of Faculty of Arts, which is about humans insofar as they're more than nature, the Faculty of Science, which is about nature, and the Faculty of Engineering, which is about machines. And everybody, most people navigate the world according to these three distinctions. Like we usually classify the world according to human thing, natural thing, artificial or technical thing. And think about the vocabulary we have to talk about humans, culture, civilization, politics, society, history. These are all things that supposedly only emerge once we leave the state of nature, once we're no longer animal. Simultaneously, we all know that these distinctions really don't make all that much sense. We had the microbiome. Humans are more than nature. Most of the neurotransmitters in our brain are made by bacteria living in our gut. So we're truly microbial. We're descendants of microbes, if you will. And think about AI. You know, we're more than machines. Well, I understand it's much harder to embrace AI than it is to embrace the microbiome. But at the very least, there is a suspense of the certainty that humans and technical things are quintessentially and irreducibly different from one another. They can share things. So we need new vocabulary. We need new vocabulary of what it is to be human. And that was an obsession. It was something that drove me. And when we began working together, thinking together, one idea was, imagine you could build a product that has a philosophical agency. You use it, and you have experiences that automatically lift you out of the human nature technology world and into a new world, into something where you experience the world and yourself differently. Well, at digital environments or digital spaces, imagine you put on goggles and you feel yourself in nature rather than I'm here and I'm observing nature. Imagine you could hear acoustically the crack of an iceberg, like taking off at the Yakusaban Glacier, and what you hear is the sound of the depth of time, like 10,000 years are, and you hear this, and you can zoom in with your goggles and you live in there, and you create planetary experiences for a planetary humanity, so that nature you experience is not your homeland or a local environment, but truly something that you care about on a planetary level. So that was my initial interest in also the potential of the metaverse and what it could be if one would populate reality labs with artists and designers and yeah, so much of that.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's start by I think we are all duty bound to spend at least a moment trashing Zuckerberg. I mean, so let's start with what's gone wrong, right? What hasn't gone wrong, and if it's gone wrong, what has gone wrong with the narrative to date, whether it's the proximate narrative with Zuckerberg and Meta, or any historical narrative around digital environments. What has gone wrong with any of that in any way?
Yeah, I can start. I don't think so much went wrong in a certain way. I think that the approach is insufficient, and that is so. We did before we built LIM, we had something called Transformations of the Human, or TOFT. It's a little school that had a consulting branch, and we worked with Meta quite a bit. And one of the things about Meta is that it's an engineering-led company. So they solve technical problems. Somebody says, wouldn't it be cool that we would have goggles and we would be like, you know, you live in San Francisco and you live in New Zealand and we see each other and great. And now we solve that technical problem. How can we make that work? And you come in and say, icebergs and glaciers and cracks and flying with the satellites and diving is like, there's no space for that. Like, that's not why they build a product. They want to solve a technical problem. So the wish to build products from a philosophical perspective, from an artistic perspective, that introduce new experiences that humans couldn't have before, beyond the HNT distinction, human nature technology, is like is not what they're after. But that's why they have to treasure.
Well, I think that I think you're right about that. I also think the major problem was that we are in this kind of crisis of narrative. We don't tell stories well, and engineers generally don't tell stories well. Companies that are not creatively led, that are thirsty for felt experiences, that have a desire for something new, need to be articulated. And it's incredibly hard to articulate technology. It's one of the hardest things to do, is to paint a picture of an experience that we haven't had and create an empathic bridge for that through a story. And even though we've been doing it for thousands and thousands of years, it's very, very hard to do. And when it's led by ops and engineering, it generally doesn't get there. So in terms of Meta, you know, I have friends that work there who are using these things in meetings that had never met a colleague, and then they meet the colleague and they already understand their mannerisms, and they already know them in a way that they hadn't known them before. So to an extent, it was very successful. It was that we were confronted with an icon, kind of archetype of the technocrat that presented this. And so, you know, it's a shame how many incredible ideas fall flat because the story wasn't told properly and the bridge wasn't developed. And I think that was one of the issues with that launch. We need people like Mark who are painting the future, and we need the engineers to describe this in technical terms. But we also really, really, really need to honor creativity at the highest levels, and especially when we're making new things. And we need to consider how other human beings will understand that. And that's a very, very, very challenging thing to do that is not quantifiable on a bottom line. It's very hard to measure for a company. So when you have financial ebbs and flows, you have moments of crisis, you have markets that affect how choices are made in companies. These are when companies make huge mistakes, and they sort of force branding as a box to tick, and it's generally done through an ecosystem that is driven by outsiders who don't necessarily understand insiders, or insiders who don't necessarily understand themselves. So I think that when we look back at, you know, the rebrand of when it moved from Facebook to Meta, I think that it was just like an incoherent story that we couldn't understand. And we all kind of gave up then, maybe, and didn't really try it. Because now, 3 years later, 3 years maybe? Or 2 years? 2 years. Knowing people that work there every day who are benefiting from those technologies in human terms. Like, I was so amazed to hear this, that someone who'd been working virtually, you know, for a year and a half, already felt that likeness with someone when they were in a physical room, because they'd been in meetings that way and their mannerisms were tracked and all of that. So, you know, the jury's out on that. I think the more interesting conversation maybe right now about the kind of inflection point we're at is how creatives and IP will work in creativity. And that's one of the things that this project really unlocks. So the creator economy, which is another thing that Meta is very focused on and very interested in pursuing, is how do we ensure that there's a future of creativity that's monetized for the individual so that they can live a functional life and keep making, and then our incentives are aligned to see more beautiful things in the world, to feel more things, and to honor creativity.
Because we're going to come back right to that. Just on Meta, right? So the way we frame this, because we have to be very careful, partly because we live in Zuck's town, right? But also because the truth is that he has done something very interesting. Like, I think what happened with Zuckerberg is he saw like technology potential in virtualization And being, to be fair, one of the great tech visionaries and builders of the age, I think he could see the pathway of it way faster and more concrete than other people could see. Partly he also has a lot of money to spend, so he could make it happen. But I think what ended up happening is his enthusiasm for a clearly, for him, clear technical potential was prematurely productized and narrativized without really thinking through how it would come across, right? I think the truth is that social VR probably isn't the product that people will attach to. It certainly makes sense from Facebook's perspective because it's obviously the product thing you can attach to the 3 billion multi-active user social network. But actually I think what was going on, and we're about to see that this is what's going on, he's just basically testing infrastructure onto which he's going to layer more and more thoughtfully productized experiences. And so I think that social VR and what we saw from Meta's Horizon Worlds and Horizon Workrooms was from the user perspective, or the general user perspective, prematurely productized. But there's something else going on. I think the other thing is that where I think Zuckerberg has failed more profoundly, we put this in what we call our spatial web or spatial tech thesis, is misunderstanding. I think this is kind of essential to what you guys are presenting, is that how humans are immersed in things is very subtle, and there isn't really a clear boundary between what we call in our spatial tech thesis technical immersivity and what we call narrative immersivity. Right? Zuck, I think, thinks, and this is where I think he is wrong, that deep technical immersivity is sufficient to capture attention and drive value and drive narrative. I think that's wrong. The Lascaux Caves are a metaverse. The novel is a metaverse. It is narratively immersive. It's profoundly so. And our imaginative and our cognitive capabilities are so good at overriding the physics of our environment that if we forget, we can imagine ourselves into what of a novel just by putting words in front of our face. We've missed out actually how cognitive machinery and biomechanical machinery works in generating immersion. And I think that's where what's going to happen next is there's going to be a marriage of narrative immersivity with technical immersivity. Films work because they are narratively immersive. No one's thinking that a flat screen with light flashing on it is actually cars blowing up, or people kissing, or whatever it may be, right? It's narratively immersive, not and only marginally technically immersive, and a 3D film is worse than a flat 2D film. I think that's where Zuckerberg went wrong, and so where I think we want to contribute, and this is what Andrew was pointing to, is that boundary where we're being, sensitive to the power of technical immersivity. 3D is something, right? But recognizing that you can be narratively immersed in a map, which isn't very technically immersive. You want to go to the hospital because your wife's having a baby, that is your main narrative. Just because it's not 3D doesn't mean you're not in there. And so I think that the productization is probably early. If you've seen the photoreal avatars that he is using for an interview with Lex Friedman in the last few weeks, you will know why he was spending $10 billion a year on this. Because it is photoreal, there's no uncanny valley, and you will use that. And you will be exactly as Andrew said, learning about people that you've never met and their mannerisms and their identity. So before we get back to how creators drive narrative and meaning and value, is there a technical maturity that we can just rely on and there's a palette of technical tools, or do we need more cycles of technical evolution before creators can really come to the forefront? Is Apple's vision the thing? Is Zuckerberg's platform ready? Is Humane the game? What is the technical framing? I'm trying to get out of the technical into the social and the narrative, but just the last question on technical per se, are we ready for a narrative revolution in spatial computing, or are there new technologies we need to invent or mature before we do that?
I'm more interested in what Tobias would have to say about that, actually, because of what you're doing now.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. So I'll answer that question as good as I can through sort of the back door, going back to Zuck and to Meta for a second again. So the way that the metaverse is built right now stays basically within all known categories of the world as they exist right now, right? So what I tried to articulate that with my little introduction is that we need new vocabularies, new ideas, new concepts, new experiences. So if you build a technology that reaffirms the world as we have known it, well, then you don't do that, right? Then you don't practice technology as a philosophical opportunity. So if the technology is mature as technology, then it's just another technology for me. We have to learn to build technology in a way that sort of, it's not the technology that we use, but it's the development of the technology that enables us to sort of make philosophical experiments, to experience the world differently. Lim is trying to do that by working at the intersection of philosophy, art, and AI. But it's not, it could be about spatial computing, but it is right now not about spatial computing. You know, like a simple way of putting it is most people who build AI right now build AI for one of two reasons, so that we can automate things that we thought only humans can do, or so that we can have human-to-human relations with non-humans, with AI. So in both cases, AI is built as human. But AI is quintessentially non-human intelligence, like its axiomatic structure, the high-dimensional latent space. It's very, very different from humans. What if this non-humanness would be a feature, not a bug? What if you could find ideas outside of the possibilities of the human mind? Wouldn't that be cool? Why is nobody doing that? Well, if you build AI as a tool, spreadsheet plus, you will never get there. You have to have a different incentive. And that's only possible if you bring philosophers and artists who are like literally sitting there with the engineers building something together. And I'm deeply convinced there is no difference in that respect with creating spatial planetary experiences. You need Andrew, you need John, you need Tobias, and you need a bunch of VR engineers together to optimize the technology for these experiences. Maybe the best example I can give is not from Meta, but from Snap. If you do, it's AR, not VR, admittedly, but Snap is fully based on a Cartesian grid. Like there is a central viewer and there is a central perspective, like, you know, Italian Renaissance. It's like the earliest theory of what an image is with Alberti and Della Pittura is like, draw a triangle, look in, you know. So there are lots and lots and lots of visual experiences that we could have that are not organized in terms of the central perspective. If you're interested in art, you can, you know, like think about Hockney's various photographs and videos, how he cuts stuff together. Think about animals that have non-Cartesian orientation in space. You can create those visual experiences for humans, but only if you optimize the technology for it. If you don't do this, then later it's too late. Then you have already reaffirmed technology in the modern classical sense of a tool.
So to start positioning creators in the conversation, let's take one step back and we'll keep on zooming in. But also feel free to join in. There's a number of people I know in the audience who probably will be able to kind of contribute, at least at the level that the conversation is happening. And I may or may not point to the various people that could probably do that. But let's start with this, right? Feel free to be as provocative as you need to be. To what extent is creativity in the role of creators in the history of technical progress lagging technology evolution, and to what extent does it lead technology evolution? Because technical leaders, I think, flatter themselves to think that they lead and society adds creativity afterwards. And I suspect that there are ways to describe, to argue the opposite case. But how do you come down on that one?
You know, creativity is invention, so I don't think that creativity is governed by the visual arts or the sonic arts or any of it. I think that creativity is invention. There's an enormous amount of creativity in accountant offices and law firms. I mean, this creativity is invention. So I don't know how to delineate necessarily tools, the development of tools being a non-creative act and the development of the output of that tool being, you know, in its own space. I think that, you know, historically there have been many opportunities for invention. They often come from inquiry. And one of the wonderful things about this moment in time is that we're learning that creativity is rooted in the inquiry. So if anyone's been on DALL-E, you know that it's your prompt. What is your question? And I think that that's never changed. I think it's always been a what would happen if, or I wonder if. And I think that oftentimes now the best ideas are coming out with a kind of humility in the approach to finding meaning. So if you are stacking up evidence to a presupposition and looking for something to stack onto it, you're not going to create something new, like the device I've been talking about. But if you wonder what happens if, like, I wish I had the visual, actually, I'm sorry, I couldn't put it on the slide, but I made a piece that I actually just showed last week, and it's a really simple idea, and I think it's a good description of this, which is that in March 2020, when we all went into lockdown, and we were all kind of panicked that we weren't doing things. I know that any creative I knew was just kind of like, I want to make something, I want to do something. I just put a camera up on a forest, and it was empty, and I did a time lapse every 3 seconds through maybe late June, early July. And I don't know why I did it, but I was just like, I wonder what happens when it looks like the forest leaves out. And I go back 2 years later, an opportunity to create this video piece, and I ran that time lapse, and it was just jittery and panicky. And actually it felt like that moment in time, but that happened, there's nothing more, I had no more questions. I already felt like that, it's not saying anything, it's just representing a feeling from that moment. And then we were wondering what would happen if we put it through an AI frame interpolator, and the jitter went away, and every frame connected to another frame, and then it looked like the forest was breathing. And then that time lapse became a 3-hour film of a forest kind of breathing out its leaves. So while we were inside hiding from a respiratory attack on our respiratory system, the trees were going, the lungs, the other side of our planet, and that film became something of meaning through the tool. So that tool was not created for that purpose. I didn't have that outcome in mind. I didn't go out to set to make a film about a forest breathing. But a question, a what if, created that. Are you raising your hand?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no. Yeah, I have 2 questions. Is that okay?
Sure.
One is about like inclusivity, because like I just traveled the world a lot and came back here after like actually March 2020. And one view I have a lot on the Bay Area is that it's very pioneering and innovative, but actually about inclusivity. How does it give access, and you with your new platform, are you expanding it to areas in the world where people don't have access because the technology in itself is already so exclusive in many ways? And then the second question I have, and there's a great opportunity, I think, for creators in other areas to contribute and to contribute to this. So the data sets and the AI is not only fed by people who already have a lot of resources and access. And then the second question is regarding what my concern is that oftentimes, and I worked in VR since for over 10 years, and I've developed multiple biofeedback projects. It's a very virtual thing, and it's very mind-driven, and so it could be also very distracting and dopamine-driven. And so how can you integrate like mind, body, and you mentioned breathing and wellness more, which I think could be possible.
What is your name?
Hannes.
Hannes. Okay. So the first question was basically inclusivity. The second question was embodiment of the experience, right? So we'll park this for a second. So I want Andrew to finish his thought about where were you heading with that intersection of the artistic setup and the technical expansion of the output, as it were. You finish your thought then.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the point I was making was that I'm not sure if there's any point where the tools will get up to speed. They are constantly evolving in an exponential way.
Yeah.
What's way more important is that we continue asking questions and we create frictionless opportunities for creatives to engage with tools. So, I mean, yeah.
Tobias, on that point, how do you see the tension, the leading edge between? I was already implying to art versus technology, I suppose.
Yeah.
Creativity, technology, but either way, right?
Yeah, I find it fascinating, and so I do think many engineers are super creative. I mean, who could doubt that? And many people I've worked with are incredibly creative. But what I do recognize is that many engineers look for creative solutions to a problem where the terms of the problem are known. And many of my artist friends look for creativity in the terms of innovating or inventing something, an experience, visual experience, acoustic experience, that we don't yet know how to hear or how to see. So it's a different kind of creativity. And I think that let's take music generators or visual or image. Music is actually better. So basically, like you go to a web page, there's an AI, and you're expected to be an engineer to make music. Most musicians, though, are not actually trained as engineers. So the systems are built by one kind of creativity that does often not like fit the other kind of creativity. And for me, I'm frustrated by this. I'm frustrated because the artistic creative potential of the technology is not developed because we have the separation of technical, so basically of engineering and of the arts. And I do think that truly, like digital environments, like they scream for the integration of these two things. They scream for it. But if you build the tools and then they're done, then that's an incredibly sad, lost story. But just one historical example that I really love is I don't think, Galilei, right? Galilei learned from Alberti literally like how to draw. Like he went through all the triangles in Alberti's Tractatus and learned how to draw. But he didn't know how to draw the shadows of the moon. So he read an essay by Leonardo da Vinci on how to draw shadows. And then he drew basically the shadows of the moon, which is remarkable. Like it's a very, very cool thing. We think of Leonardo as this guy, mathematical genius. No, he learned from two artists. It's actually really cool. And we do see not enough of that in some
Just a quick comment on the question. My sense of it, and I think it's we'll have the same general idea, is that when tools and capacities are in some way stable, technical advance is possible because you can make a tool better, you can implement better against a certain goal or capacity. But when tools are unstable or new or novel, and when goals and capacities are unstable, creators and the human creative capacity is the leading force, because it doesn't have the need to be defined as the starting point.
Here's a really cool example, just quickly. So one of the remarkable things about AI is that it's a technology that has features that we thought technology cannot possibly have, like learning, forming representations, having a sort of autonomous agency on the basis of what it learned. So wouldn't we want to explore just that? Wouldn't we want to release AI from the sort of steam engine concept of technology that we've inherited? Well, that requires that philosophers and artists are there. If we don't do this, we will build AI as if it were a classical technology, and then we're stuck with it, so to speak. Then it's too late.
On Horizon, right? I think one of the challenges is that when you go into Horizon worlds, right, you go into spaces that are spatially configured in a very clumsy way, right? One of the many lobbies you go into is like literally just triangles and podiums and shit. And there's no real reason why we have what I call default tectonics, what architecture would call tectonics, which is like how you frame space with physics. Because if the physics is arbitrary, why is the space that way? Why can't you walk through walls? Why can't you fly? Why can't you, why can't you manifest an experience very differently from the way the world bequeaths us a language and a concept set? And I think that the technicians will have ideas. If we do think it is, artists will go, oh, well, we could have a wall made of feathers that becomes a flame and there's rippling or whatever, right? And I think that...
this is like the debate of skeuomorphism.
Right, exactly.
UX.
Yes.
That really, this concept that we were looking down on the people that we were making work for by saying, well, you couldn't possibly understand an address book unless it looked like paper on a screen. And these are, I don't know where these decisions come from, but I think that in truth, what's most important and the insight that I hope we can all bring away from this in many ways is that, and I know it sounds a little trite, but that we do need people that are not bound by quantifiable kind of, KPIs that can think and that don't have to rise to be the COO level of thought or engage in that kind of vocabulary and dialogue, but that there is space for imagination within a world that is slowly squeezing that out. Just look at the major corporations right now. they are not being led by artists and thinkers. And our greatest moments have been led by artists and thinkers throughout time. And so, this is just a basic idea that this town doesn't seem to understand or respect. I live in Europe, sorry.
Airbnb though.
What?
Airbnb though. One example.
What is that? I don't know them well.
How do you mean Airbnb? What?
Well, he's a designer.
Yeah, run by designers. It's
I mean,
true.
well, explain why that changes anything for the company. I mean, Airbnb is a standard. I mean, I know that Brian Chesky is a designer in theory. Well, how does design lead to the outcomes that Andrew's? I'm being provocative. Help me understand why design leads to a better outcome for society through the Airbnb platform.
I think that he's changing the structure of Airbnb right now, where he's taking away that engineering-led focus and actually bringing in the artists and philosophers together, because he's about that specifically.
So
He's like
RISD, right?
RISD, very design-focused, very much involved. Like, what is the customer feeling about it, and not just. He just did a Diary of the CEO podcast. He talks about exactly what you all are talking about. Like, doing away with this because everything is engineering-led. We're trying to be more human-focused. And what is the philosophy that we're bringing into Airbnb of how can it be more a social space and not just a real estate platform?
That's refreshing.
So,
Hilmar and Max, just on this point of whether in technology leads art or art leads technology, maybe if they have any comment from your work at Pixar, your work at Industrial Light and Magic, share. If you don't, then we'll carry on. But feel free, because I think there's an interesting question, particularly in the film industry, of how technology has been led by artistic creativity and
tempting to pile on to something that Meredith just said about Chesky running Airbnb.
right.
I'm not sure if a technologist would have had the audacity to believe that building trust amongst people through a technology platform,
Yeah.
which happens on Airbnb, is possible. So I would agree with you that just that is pretty phenomenal. But Max, you want to answer that question?
This Max.
Oh,
This man?
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, ILM is definitely driven by narrative, the whole sort of cosmology that they've created. And when it's a completely different experience when you go inside any of those XLab experiences than it is seeing one of the movies. You just feel like you're totally immersed in it.
I mean, so but on the embodiment question, and we'll kind of expand out from that question.
Sorry, really quick, because there's something interesting. You were Pixar.
I was at ILM.
Pixar.
Wrong.
A lot.
Okay. Because there's this amazing story about like the early days that I heard on a tour there once, where all of those animators and creatives were just crazy. They built these rooms where they did their work, and they were just nuts. And Jobs walked through there just like, what the hell is this? And just wanted to sort of like put everyone in, clean it up. This is ridiculous. And yeah, of course, was not successful in that because that his whole success in the company was dependent upon these guys in these rooms. Men and women who were making, environments for imagination, and you couldn't impose a Cartesian grid on that, and it's interesting to think.
He gave a talk on that, right? Like I think this was called Two Ships Sail By Each Other in the Night, and it is actually about creativity in tech and creativity in the arts. And these guys think that these guys are anything but creative.
Yeah.
And these guys think that these guys never get anything done. But the terms and conditions of creativity are basically not the same.
Yeah.
And he thought that in that talk,
Yeah.
he was not exactly shy in praising himself.
Yeah.
So his praising himself was that at Pixar he succeeded in combining those two things.
Can't. Go ahead.
Oh,
You go first, please.
I was just going to comment. I also wonder if the separation between art and technology puts in a distance that maybe doesn't need to exist. And I wonder for Tobias and also for Brian Chesky, like
technology being the medium of the artist is not an arbitrary this and this. It's actually to have the craft and the time put into understanding a technology, to be able to use it as a medium to the level of craft that we expect oils or watercolors.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think so. So the Greek word techne, right, from which technical or technology comes, is basically actually craft, right? There's actually vernacular practice. It isn't what we know as technical things, which is hyper abstraction. It's basically skills that can be codified through practice rather than ideas that you may or may not wish to implement. And I think that word you use, craft, is probably the touchdown. And one of the interesting things about people like I think Zuckerberg is the truth is that they are craftsmen, right? And it's wrong to say they aren't very, very good at their craft. And if you've done any coding, and I've done some coding, and I'm a pretty straightforward, basic coder, it's exceptionally creative. It's exceptionally craft-oriented, and like the 10x coders that get the $1 million salaries, they're all craftsmen. They're all the modern. They all have the atelier there was a parallel to the Renaissance of these being the hyper craftsmen of the age, I think.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about chess games, right? Because I do think that most people before, and it was very difficult for Airbnb to take off famously, thought about a network as a web page where you do something. And so the idea that a network is a live network. You live in somebody's home. What does that mean? How can we literally build a network as human-to-human contact where you want to visit somebody? How do you make somebody welcome and make that part of it? It's truly remarkable and not at all obvious from an engineering perspective, right? I think the potential of digital environments goes one step further because the sort of network technology on which Airbnb serves can be built just as a technical software, so to speak. So to enable experiences through the technology in a technical space, basically. That is where the artist and the engineer must ideally work together. And I think that,
To present the problem, it means to find a creative solution.
Yeah.
Is the future of Airbnb, I mean, I know nothing about that company, by the way, but is the future of that company stepping into a world so you can try it out and step into their home in a metaverse-like world, and do these questions come up, and do engineers?
To your point, Hilmar, so a platform that starts with trust is kind of what we've ended up doing, right? I didn't realize it would be quite so much the thing. When I've gone, I've had my 8th meeting with Foster and Partners, and the guy is basically looking at me going to executive partner. The whole vibe is, can I trust you, motherfucker? Because there's a lot riding on this shit. It's not technical, right? You can prove the technology, right? But they want to know if they can trust you. But to have this question,
I have a last point on the technical tools, though, that I think is interesting. I've been making these one-to-one scale photographs of animals. And one of the things that I'm bound by in this piece that we just finished, which is an Asian elephant, which is 11 by 12 feet, is that there was no material made right now that could bend so it could get in and out of places that I could make it seamless. And the solution for that became an ancient craft technology that I could only find the craftsmen to make in Madrid. That's basically Belgian linen, calcium carbonate, and rabbit skin glue that created a perfect white ground plane that then we could shoot pigment ink into to develop the image that could then be rolled on a drum, put in a crate, and fly from Madrid to New York, stretched on canvas and put up inside. And that was like spanning, what was probably, 600 to 700 years of technology working together for an outcome to experience something that we've never seen before.
Beautiful.
So
we know that if Johnny Ive was still designing the iPhone that we've made of Belgian linen, calcium carbonate, and rabbit skin, he'd find his way there. So to Tan's point about embodiment, right? If there's a tremendous opportunity for us to humanize digital space, if creators can immediately find a role and an economic livelihood there, how do you bridge that gap, right? Avoiding the trend back towards abstraction and distance. Is it that just the better quality of technical immersion will lead to a sense of embodiment? Is it a form factor thing? Is it haptic suits? Or is it something that, how do we solve the problem of embodiment basically if we're in digital space?
I think it goes back to what you were saying about novels. I mean, when the metaverse popped, and you know, daily we were being asked to work on metaverse projects, and everything was new, I thought, you know, the metaverse has been around a while. You know, we have Easy Pass, and my car just drives right through the toll booth. There's a digital layer on a physical world that's been around for a very long time. And so a lot of people disagreed with me, but the point, because they thought that I over-reduced it, but I felt like it's been here and we've been working on it, and further we are moving into a kind of mesh of a digital layer in the physical world. Now, embodiment for me is very dependent upon meaning, which, as we were talking about earlier today, is different for absolutely everybody. And so for me, embodiment can happen, you know, with headphones and a song. And embodiment can happen in many, many ways. I was in a sound bath in Bali not too long ago, and I was not where I physically was. I was somewhere else that person had taken me to. And I think that, you know, we have experiences now that are dependent upon what we bring to it, and what our cultural and personal touch points are. So I think that for wide embodied, if we were going to kind of like put a big net out and say, like, what does that look like? I think the more levers we pull and add on, the further away we may get from that possibility, because when it's too much, like 3D films and things, we actually want to return back to ourselves, and we are taken out of it, or some are and some aren't. But I think that, you know, this is not an and or binary thing. I think that embodiment is different for everybody. Some people can simply be taken away in a poetry reading, and some people want a fully immersive LED wall environment. So I think that there is not a simple answer that's going to be broad across the board. I think that it's going to be very exciting when we've over-indexed on it, and we walk into spaces that are just a barrage of information for our neurological system that we can't handle, or that many of us can't handle, and you know, which is kind of what we saw on a very small level with the return to painting for the last 15 years out of hyper-real photography that happened in the early 2000s. I think that, like, we ebb and flow, and our needs change as culture changes and other inputs change. So embodiment can happen in many ways, which is why what Treasury is doing, and what we've been talking about a lot, which is that it's not just about 3D assets. It can be a piece of music, it can be many things, but developing a safe place for IP to sit that creators trust to put it there, that has inclusivity, that will involve many inputs, will just exponentially explode the outputs and just make more for more people.
Yes, embodiment.
You know, so I admit that I never understood that. Like I tried really hard, but so first, you know, like I have to probably explain myself. I said in the intro that I love the art, the skill of thinking about thinking. So obviously I'm like super comfortable with abstract thinking, and I love logic, and I love conceptual history. But I have never ever thought about this as happening without my body. Like when I'm thinking, this is a whole body, you know, workout basically. Andrew said at the beginning, and we've had that discussion a couple of times, like what does it mean to not just think it, but to feel it? And my mind always goes to, what does thinking feel like? Like, what does thinking about thinking feel like? Why is an insight, oh my God, I have an idea. Like, look, like my whole body was just involved. So I'm never quite sure what that means. I mean, I know that, you know, like historically in philosophy, phenomenology takes issue with thinking and Cartesianism and so on. But that's a misunderstanding of thinking. That's a form of thinking as a sort of form of hyper-technical rationality that does not actually involve any question related to me, where I live my thought, where thought is a form of life. So I'm not good with like.
I think the embodiment question. Sorry, yes, I think the embodiment question is really great. If you think about the Enlightenment, like it's bequeathed a couple of things to us. One is like lots of ideas and like abstraction, and the other is the kind of sovereignty of the individual, right? And in one way, it's true that the modern world is very sort of heady, as they say, and it's abstracted. And there's a sort of narrative, I think this is sort of applied in Hannah's question, that we should get back to the body, right, in embodiment. But if you take the premise of the body to be kind of an extension of the second layer of the Enlightenment, which is the individual as sovereign, you get trapped into isolation quite quickly, right? Eating is very embodied, but I think most people, I include myself being a semi-autonomous example, are very distracted when they're eating. How can you be distracted while doing a hyper-embodied thing? So there's kind of interesting tensions inside the concept of embodied, there's like going back to the body. And I think if you think about embodiment from a different perspective, and one of the things we did lose with the sort of economic enlightenment was some premise of connectivity, right? The idea of ideas isn't just the only problem with it. The idea of the sovereign individual is basically killing the idea of connectedness as the grounds of doing things. It was useful to get away from superstition and kind of feudalism, but it is a bit of disconnection there. So if you ask yourself, what does it mean to be touched? Someone said they touched you. It doesn't mean they poked you. It means they moved you. And most being touched is not physically embodied. And so I think if we discover that, if we observe that when we talk about connectedness and being connected as a human society, and in a way reconnecting in a way that the Enlightenment has sort of kind of decoupled us from, it isn't just sitting down and doing things with our bodies and touching things. It's being connected. It's being touched in a psychological and emotional sense. And I think we have to kind of reboot this idea of embodiment a bit, because I do think that if we have narratively rich experiences, we will be touched more by the things that happen in digital environments. And that may or may not lead to more or less physical embodiment, but it comes to, I think, Tobias's point, which is we're always embodied. We're not going to be brains and bats at any point in the near future. And I think that the meaning layer of whatever it is we do is actually like the arbiter of whether we truly are embodied in the sense of the full social psychological body. Are we connected with ourselves? In the meaning sense, we're connected to nature, are we connected to other people? That is the body that matters, I think. And just to be sitting in your room going, I'm embodied, you know, maybe that's not the right.
Tobias wants to be provocative.
Let me be provocative. So I did some research on the history of the word touch, and let me make a distinction between word and concept. And so the idea that we are emotionally touched is like an entirely modern idea. You don't find it anywhere in literature before the 19th century, which is fascinating. And just think about this for 1 second. Like, so you talked about feudalism, and let's say you serve and you live somewhere. You think that the main question that preoccupied people was the balance between reason and touch and connectivity. So you see very quickly and easily that these are truly modern ideas. And sure, I believe in like the haptic is truly important for me. Even when I write a book, I want to see the papers on which it is printed before and want to feel it. And I have this weird idea that the quality of the paper is important for whether ideas are transmitted or not. However, I don't think that haptic is a corrective to reason or to thoughtfulness. It might be a corrective to technical rationality or instrumental rationality, but not to sort of thoughtfulness, to simple distinctions between true and fails. And in anthropology or history of anthropology, to emphasize that if people are haptic was sort of to assume that they live through the body, but the higher faculties of reason have not been developed. So this whole juxtaposition always leaves me really uncomfortable. I find it very troubling. Like,
on this point, right? So we've kind of come to it in a kind of roundabout way, but it's kind of good. Does the opportunity of digital spaces enable us to associate differently and or better and or with better results, right? Because that would be one place where I think psychology is not landed. This idea is people are just going to hang out. It turns out that this is not very safe. It's rather odd. What are we doing in that domain of a discovery? Is it something to create us a lead, new associative experience, and event concepts? How do we associate better or differently in digital space?
Again, I find it really hard, just because, you mentioned traveling the world. It's like people are different everywhere, and people have different touch points and experiences everywhere, even across the coast of this country. I find it amazing that there are, hyper-visual experiences that I just cannot handle. I was on an F1 simulator the other day, and it made me feel totally sick. And the guy that was showing it to me is like a competitive, this is what he does. He can sit in the seat 4 or 5 hours a day, and he's racing professional F1 drivers and this thing. I couldn't do it, and I wound up going like 10 miles an hour looking at the mountains on this track. And, because I can't handle that because of me. But if we zoom out of that very basic idea, I just want to set the table with it, like, what will be new experiences and who will drive that? It will be based on what ifs, not on we should do this because. So it will be driven by a question. It won't be driven by an answer or a problem to solve. I'm very much looking forward to when the field of neuroaesthetics starts to enter and collide with digital experiences. So all the work that's happening in Hopkins and other people that are thinking about neuroaesthetics right now are going to create collisions of those experiences. So your visual experience may be digital, but the olfactory experience won't be. I mean, one of my favorite artists working right now is Cecil Tolas, who works with smells in Berlin, and she's doing extraordinary work and transporting people through smell. And her exhibitions are phenomenal, and her work is important. I think that it's going to be these moments where multi-sensory collisions are starting to occur. So the other day, I got the experience to listen to Liam Young narrate live a film. So it was a visual film that was extraordinary, and he was standing in the room with a mic narrating it. And it was so much more profound that I could see his lips move, and I could see a human telling me a story while I was watching a world of 2050. And I couldn't believe that this isn't a thing that we go to all the time. So, yeah.
I also have two questions. The first one is like kind of, I've been thinking about this entire time. Did you all coordinate your outfits?
No, we're just unimaginative with that.
The second one, because you brought up smells, and also something I've been thinking about as we talk about space, which is the concept of an umwelt. An animal has a particular number of sensory receptors, and humans do as well, and that humans all have slightly different umwelts from each other. But what I'm curious about, as you bring up this thing around smells, is that the way that digital space or the way digital tools have changed our human umwelts brings up this question of time and how we experience time differently. So if we look at a dog's umwelt of scent and smell, whenever they're walking by something and smelling something, they're not just smelling that one scent, they're smelling the scent, passing it through their nasal passages, and then saying like, this is what happened 3, 5, whatever minutes or weeks ago. But as humans have been traditionally going through internet online spaces, we actually experience thought and connections in the same way that dogs are experiencing smells. So it's not just what's happening right now, but you're also able to see what has happened throughout time. And so if we think about space and digital space particularly as, if time has been in the machine era, this notion of mechanical time, and before then this notion of seasonal time, how does time and our perception of time now change in digital space, where it's not quite just nature, a seasonal machine, industrial is mechanical. This is this sort of new liminal
Durational time becomes-
Durational.
Before he responds, let's just say we also agreed to have the same hairstyle.
Okay, good.
I thought the first thing you were going to say was going to correct the pronunciation of unwells, please.
Well,
He's got red socks, mine are pink. For self-expression.
But
happening
last
here.
time when we met, his were red and mine were pink.
That's true.
Share on that point, 'cause I do think that is super profound, right? Which is, and I do think that for me that's the landing point of this conversation, which is actually all of the questions I'm asking are essentially leading to a dead end, right? I mean, that's kind of the premise here. We just don't know, right, how we're going to experience once all of these sensory things are disconnected from the default technologies of the world. What is your?
Well, I really do think that the new is not arbitrary. I know this sounds weird, but we can only experience the new by recognizing that something old does not work, right? And something new begins. But when you actually do recognize that something old doesn't work, you can ask which are the aspects of the old that no longer work. And then you have a bridge into something that you can experiment with. And I truly do think that that this is a kind of work that is totally feasible, totally possible. And so, like, this is one way for me to connect your two questions. I don't want to miss sitting with somebody at a table or in a room, breathe the same air, breathe the same microbiome. The other laughs, and I feel the laughter on my body. I don't want to lose being contemporary in space, like sharing space and time together. I don't want to lose this like full body immersive experience of what we have here that is like incredibly important. So to build digital spaces to replace that, like on the other hand, my wife lives in Germany. If I can see her in a digital space, that's better than seeing her just on my iPhone probably. But the question that intrigues me is, what are the unique affordances that such digital spaces make? What do they give to us in a positive possibility? Sure, I can imagine that this is like Netflix 28.0, and it's even more absorbing, and I'm totally like, great. But what positive new experiences do they enable? What can we do with them? Why does it philosophically matter? And that involves time. Are there new experiences of time? And I do think that that's a fascinating question.
I'm not sure. Well, I mean, when you asked that question, I thought about something Tobias was saying earlier about, can you imagine experiencing in Cape Cod, putting a net in the water and pulling up 10 cod because it was just filled.
There are all these early descriptions of Cape Cod that then at different seasons there was so much cod that the boats could not enter the bay because there were too many fish. They could not advance. They literally were stuck. That's why it's called Cape Cod. Imagine you could go back in time to that moment so that you actually have a sense of what happened. Or glaciers, or the experience of.
And it's about understanding. I mean, one of my favorite tools of image making is the control of time. And I've worked a lot with time and how we can experience and understand the way a bird would fly. If we can understand, or a forest in 3 hours over 4 months, or a bird in flight over 10 minutes. When you start to begin to spend experiences with things that are out of our own time, in our own time to experience them, in our own space to experience them, we have an empathic bridge, and then we think about things differently. So what are the opportunities in digital space where we can use time as a tool for understanding and coherence and observation? And I think that one of the things I also just wanted to maybe connect to this is that one of the things I'm most excited about, I spend a lot of time with companies that are working into the future and getting people to understand what this activity will be, whether it's in nuclear, or some area of climate tech, basically. It's so crucial that we can tell stories about the future in a way that people understand as the now. So how do we consider nature as a future, not a past? How do we consider our technology as a future in the now? And so digital tools are going to just continue to help us tell those stories that, if it's a regulator on the Hill that is the decision maker for this technology actually getting funded, or a VC in the Valley, or a local town meeting in Kentucky that is considering a coal plant turning nuclear, these are all things that we need to tell a slightly future story of in a way that we need digital tools for. So I've been much more excited about Treasury for world building of linear storytelling than for experiential things. I mean, how do you unlock that? Because that affects the real world.
There's a question here.
Hi, I just kind of wanted to bring it back on this first question about inclusivity.
Yeah.
Within the metaverse. This is a while ago. Can you elaborate on that question?
It has to do with access to this.
Can I elaborate on the question just so I can keep it in the because I had it pretty clear. I was going to kind of park it into the sort of the final question. And I think your question is, you can tell me if I paraphrase it correctly, is basically this is quite high-end and expensive stuff, right? The Oculus headset expensive, the machinery required to make it work is expensive, the software is expensive, and so forth. And if any of this is really to matter, right, it's really about human digital space. It can't just be for the micro slice of people that are lucky enough to have access to it, right? And that if there is going to be a big effect, it needs to be normalized and universal. Am I paraphrasing roughly correctly, right?
Yeah.
And so let me see if we can like round off this extremely preliminary conversation, starting with this, and see if we can package these things together. So I'd like you to imagine, right, it can be super impressionistic or technical or whatever, like impacts or benefits from these digital environments and the spatial assets that anchor them and the world of creators. Imagine and share like some very large scale benefits of them, right? What impact does it make? Is it health? Is it community? Is it some kind of embodiment? Is it whatever it may be? Sustainability, nature? And how does that become universalized and accessible now, as opposed to at some later point when all the rich people had a go? Yeah?
I just don't think I'm an expert on that. I just can't answer that. I mean, what I think of when I hear the question is I think of the earliest VR project I ever saw was Chris Milk, the empathy machine, when he went to the refugee villages and then brought those to the UN and put people into those. I think it was in Sudan. I can't remember. It was 20 years ago, maybe. That was profound. You know, people putting on VR headsets and understanding and experience through that. Now I know that's the other side of what you're saying, but I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if I have a very clear perspective on it.
I'll come back to
I think digital inclusivity, which is a thing I'm hearing a lot about, and there's a group in New York, I know some people that are working on, is a frontier that we will conquer and is very important in the conversation right now. But I'm certainly not someone who has, a real answer to it.
Please.
I'll give two answers. I'm not good for one. One is look at what's running here. What you see is an American city, right? So if you take digital environments or you take image generators and you pick one of your choice, and you type people in a city, you see an American city with American people. If you explicitly write something like Tesseract in a contemporary Middle Eastern city, you see an American wall. And that's fascinating, and I'll explain why. Like early Hollywood cinema, AI is like an empire building tool, like an ideology is literally built into it. So imagine, we try to do this with LIM. We have a small side project that might be bigger than the whole company that we call Global Humanity Image Project, or CHIP for short. And the idea is to collect data sets, not of people, but of all major architectural and pictorial traditions around the world. It's not even about, correcting bias. It's about increasing, on the one hand, increasing the total number of possibilities that these images can generate. But on the other hand, it's an opportunity to literally have a global, quote unquote, technical revolution, rather than a global revolution that that basically is built on concepts of a city, of a space, of humans, of what art is, that is specific to one site. So I think that's a powerful inclusion example. And more specific to your question, so most people love the countryside, the environment where they're from, right? But if we ever want to develop something like a responsibility for a planetary, for a planet, like for the whole world, so to speak, we must create planetary experiences. And it's really not obvious what that would look like. So you need artists, you need satellites maybe, you need novelists like Kim Stanley Robinson in his new book has a chapter on geophilosophy that's very lovely. And I do think that digital spaces can provide that. I think that digital spaces can provide planetary experiences. There, a planetary humanity can be produced, and I don't see any other opportunities to do this in a similar scale.
A couple of points on inclusivity, and we'll just quickly round off. And I don't think you will like either of these things. And so this is a debate to continue. We probably need to have more sessions on exactly this issue, like technology justice and distribution of benefits and stuff. But Zuckerberg would say, right, he does say, and it's a very interesting point, that the major adoption of Facebook, and by far the stickiest adoption of Facebook, is in countries that do not have the, in economic environments where people and businesses and communities don't have the economic means to create websites and maintain websites. So if you look at the adoption curve and the maintenance of use curve, WhatsApp has exploded in India, it's a phenomenon, and in many economically disadvantaged, or depending on how you global south and how you frame these things, they're the main predominant users of Facebook. And I've had this conversation with a number of people that say, look, it's extremely chauvinistic to say that Facebook is, a passe thing for, rich Westerners. Actually, it's a great inclusivity tool. Now, not everyone would agree with that. They say that Zuckerberg is exploiting poverty and so forth, but it's an interesting debate, right? Another thing that one may not agree with, but again, there is some sort of backing to it, which is that I would distinguish, market economies from capitalism, but I would say market economies do generate cheap shit. And the truth is, if you look at the cost per, I don't know how you define impact, but cost per CPU cycle or cost per whatever unit of benefit in the realm of computation, the market has created massive inclusivity for computation. And I'm extremely resistant to that being captured by capitalists who add debt-based usury to the market. But the truth is that there is a lot of distribution and inclusion of technology benefits through good market-based mechanisms to crash the price of everything. And Zuckerberg would say that's how he got to do what he did. So those are two provocative ways of engaging on that. I would also say that this is part of the issue, is that even if there is a kind of asymmetric curve of adoption and benefit on a timeline basis, sometimes that works out well, right? Historically, it has been the case, and Steve Jobs was one of the latter instantiations of this, or Apple, that luxury happens first, and then things get normalized because the rich people can work it all out, right? And then the market takes over. And I don't think that's just, but it might just be the way things happen, is that people with money, like the patrons in the Florentine Renaissance, just have shit they like, and then people will work it out and everyone gets to use it. That's an extremely crude way of describing and giving you not very good answers to the question of inclusivity.
Tesla Roadster created.
Right, exactly. But I think there's something in those conversations. Let's park the conversation here, and then we can have drinks and continue for a bit. Whether or not they lead to immediate inclusivity, just give us a couple of ideas for, even just very impressionist, it could be something you've already mentioned this evening, of things where a new experience is going to happen in digital space that will have tremendous cultural value, social value, psychological value, and will likely is driven by creators. Just share a vision or an idea. It could be an existing project or something completely imaginary. Please do.
Well, I will say we have to work with Andrew to create experiences of being human that unfold beyond the human nature technology distinction. And some of his work is actually transporting that, like it's enabling that. Get back to the icebergs and so on, but I truly do think that a forest is a great example. Time of an iceberg, okay, I'll make it super concrete. Since the 18th century, there's like this idea of 1756, Voltaire, Philosophie d'Histoire, the first time that sort of a philosophy of history emerges. It's this idea that there's a linear history, which is actually a trajectory which is the same for all of humanity. Some are just slower and more in the past, and of course France in 1756 is cutting edge and so on. And nature is without history. Nature is without time, because nature is cyclical. Well, we know today that the history of the planet shrinks the idea of human history into disappearance. What does it mean to experience non-linear time? And I don't mean long now. 10,000 years is not enough. That is actually still human time. I want to have like a human experience of non-human time. How would that look like? That must be possible. We can do that. And how would that shrink this whole idea of humans are set apart from nature? We have history and events and meaning, and nature does not. How cool would that be?
I mean, for like 25 years, I've been obsessed with this idea of opportunities to see things that are unseen, whether they're about controlling durational time, about releasing the context of an element of the natural world so that we can experience it and share a space with it. This is what I've focused on. So for me, I don't see some delineation. I just want to continue working in ways to find opportunities to see what is not possible to see in physical time and space of the natural world. Because when you look at a jellyfish that is lit in a particular way and presented in a particular way, or a flower or an animal, there is a, what photography does so well, the still images allow you on your own time to experience something that is stopped and pulled. And it's not necessarily fake. I'm working on a project right now about color. Something that I would love to do in an immersive digital space where I do something very stupid and simple. I'm germinating beans and seeds in the studio, and every day we take a photograph of that bean or seed that's germinating, and we quickly cut it out, and we choose with the eyedropper tool in Photoshop the newest color that's emerged on the root or the stem. And then that color becomes the field onto which that bean or seed sits. And then when you do that across a month, what you create is a palette of color that you've grown. And it's a palette of color that you've never experienced before, because all the variables are out of your hand. All you've done is made an intervention of extraction. And I think that, the more we can experience things that are shared by all, like color, to understand it in new ways and to understand that it emerges and is grown and is not a static space, are the kinds of things that I want to explore in these kinds of digital spaces. But on the other side of my practice, really quick, I just want to say that how important in the real world, in very pragmatic ways in my experience, building narratives in digital worlds about things that don't exist yet have had real world impact to seeing those things occur. And I was involved in a project that needed a very, very complicated story told in a very short period of time, because 3 people on the Hill were going to look at this. And it was going to come into their phones in a text message as they, right before they walked into a vote on the Hill. And because of this animated film that just described a concept that they didn't understand, and the coherence of that with what the team brought to bear, that affected the decision for that technology that will affect, carbon extraction happen. So I'm most interested in how stories affect the real world and shift the way we think and shift the way policymakers and decision makers release new things into the world. That for me is the most important.
I'll say thank you to these guys in 1 second. Sorry that there were a couple of we couldn't cover, but you should come and speak to the speakers and check in, because we'll be here for a little while for drinks. Just on the vision thing, I think somebody who's been kind of engaging in sort of psychedelics in the last year, having been extremely resistant to any form of intoxication or psychological intervention, I do think that is a massive opportunity to have multi-sensory engagement in a way that doesn't require pharmacological intervention. And one of the things that Max is doing with his company Gambit Labs is in that direction. It's an ADHD-oriented VR tool, and I think that what we'll end up having, one thing that will have massive impact is education, psychological, spiritual, therapeutic engagement, which is very different from entertainment. But I think partly what you're describing, how we can break out of time framing and have different experiential layers, is going to help us with that.
Well, just to add to that really quick, healing is an area that we should be focused on in digital spaces.
So before I round off and say thank you, next session will be in London. This thing is spreading. At Zaha Hadid's office, that will be available on video, and there are a bunch of events upcoming. You should check out the links on that. There's some very cool people in joining in these things, and lots of ways to engage. So I think this has been a pretty interesting starting point of a series and a kind of thematic that is pretty decoupled from fascination with technology itself. And couldn't thank Andrew and Tobias enough for setting up this conversation space. Thank you for joining us.